Salutations, future Twig. Past Twig here once again, and we're back with actually another deck tech for everyone. Or rather, we're back with the very first ever deck tech update on the Twig Mittens channel because I got some great responses from you guys on the previous episode of the deck Show Me What You Got, which I released a couple days ago, and they were so impactful, I needed to update the deck immediately, so here we go. And here we go, just taking a look at that video. As you can see, I released it like a couple days ago now, as of this recording. Basically, it was a deck that was all about exiling cards from the top of everyone's libraries, using your opponent's instants and sorceries, getting a lot of value off of that, and basically using your opponent's cards to kind of beat them down. Obviously, that was very good, but I had mentioned in that video that I wasn't so sold on the commander, which at the time was Kaza Royal Chaser, and as such, I put out a poll of like, hey, do you guys have any other commanders that you guys would recommend for this deck? And in response to this question, I actually got an answer right away on the video itself. Here's the comment itself. Thank you, Yu-Gi-Oh! Nerd22 once again, where he said, hey, you've got this card in your deck already called Val Candlekeeper Sage that would make a solid commander, especially if you include the Passionate Archaeologist background. The problem, he then also goes on to say the background's kind of expensive, which he's correct. And then, of course, he goes on to mention some other decks that he thinks could really benefit with this kind of strategy. Both Prosper Tomebound and Laughing Jasper Flint are Rakdos, sadly. So a lot of the blue cards that I was very excited to put in this deck would not work with them for obvious reasons. But I will say, fantastic other options if you want to lean more into like the black kind of theft, which black also has some fantastic stealing cards as well. So yes, thank you, Yu-Gi-Oh! Nerd22 for the comment, because I had an immediate response the minute I read this, which was, Dole. Oh my gosh, how did I overlook that? The commander that I need is literally staring me in the face from the 99, and it's a perfect commander. And then, of course, I followed up with, because, of course, I immediately had a brain blast. A bunch of cards came together, and I made some changes to the deck, which I'm going to walk you through now. First off, though, I just need to talk about the sensibility of this, because Kaza Royal Chaser was a solid commander. Don't get me wrong, very powerful commander, but we don't have a whole lot of wizards in the actual deck. I think at the time we had like 6 wizards in total, which still tapping for 1 to discount the instant and sorcery is good, but it's like kind of a mediocre effect that doesn't really tie into our deck very well. However, when you look at Val Candlekeep Researcher here, you'll see that what you do is you can tap her, and whenever you do, you add an amount of colorless mana equal to its their toughness. And this mana cannot be spent to cast spells from your hand. Well, that's okay, because in this deck, we're casting spells from exile a ton, because we're casting spells from our opponent's decks, our deck, and everything else that's been exiled. So that's totally okay. And at default, when this card taps, it's a 3 toughness creature, so you're tapping for 3 mana as opposed to 1, which is far superior. Not only that, but because it's a background style commander, the background and this commander help to lock in the first few turns. And as you'll see, we actually have a background chosen here, which is you can play on turn 3, and then you can play Val on turn 4. So you actually have your turns 3 and 4 potentially hard locked in depending on the nature of the game, which makes your early game a lot easier, which was also an area where this deck was kind of struggling a bit, was that it didn't have consistent early game. But before I get too much into the nitty-gritty of this deck and the changes I made, we need to talk about Passionate Archaeologist, which, as you recall, is the background that Yu-Gi-Oh! Nerd kind of paired with Val Candlekeep Researcher. And I'm going to be real, of the backgrounds that exist in Magic the Gathering, this is the most expensive one, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Nerd brought this up himself. It's roughly a $15 card. And I think the reason for that is that this effect, if you read it here, that commander creatures you own have, whenever you cast a spell from exile, this creature deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to target opponent, is an incredibly powerful ability, and it's on a 2 mana enchantment. This enchantment was horrifically overpowered, and I think it's super undercosted. This is probably a 4 or 5 mana background, not a 2 mana background, and I think that's part of the reason it's so popular, is that it's so easy to get out there and get so much value. And I do agree, it synergizes very well with Val. It actually turns Val into a win con for this deck, because as you can imagine, pinging down your opponents constantly with spells from exile, especially with all the impulse draw we have in the format now, is very easy. However, there is a small downside, which is that you rapidly, when you put this out, become the arch enemy of the table because people recognize the power of this card. It's a $15 card for a reason, and especially with the way this deck tends to operate, you're going to rapidly draw some heat to yourself, and I will fully admit, this deck is very powerful, but I'm not sure it's going to win in an arch enemy style situation a whole lot of the time. So, what do we do, because I'm not willing to pay $15 for a secondary commander? So what you do in that case is you look for a different option, and in this case there are some other backgrounds, and the one I chose was Tavern Brawler. This keeps us in Izzet colors because Tavern Brawler obviously brings the red mana we need, which is very important because a lot of our exile effects are in red. Additionally, it also helps us with impulse draw a bit, so it gives us not only mana in the command zone, but impulse draw as well. Commander creatures you own basically get, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. Your commander gets plus X plus O until end of turn, where X is that card's mana value. You may play that card this turn. Sadly, the power doesn't really benefit Val, as they're going to be tapping down a lot, and they care about toughness, not power. But the ability to impulse draw, have one free impulse draw per turn rotation, fairly solid effect, and it's great to have it in the command zone as a reliable way to keep ourselves drawing extra cards, and always having cards in exile for Val to be able to cast, which is very important. Also, it's very cool that this is a very underutilized commander pairing. As you can see, there's only about 92 decks, not even 100 decks on EDHREC with this pairing, so I think this is a really fun pairing to use. Alrighty, so to complement this new pairing, we had to make some fine adjustments to the deck. So first off, we were able to add in some brand new cards. In particular, we're looking at Ghostly Pilferer, Wild Wasteland, and You Find Some Prisoners. Wild Wasteland and You Find Some Prisoners are awesome. They're impulse draw and very reliable impulse draw. Wild Wasteland's a bit interesting because you skip your draw step, but that's okay with this deck because we really want to be casting cards from exile. And with all the other ways we have to exile cards, we're going to have a lot of cards kind of floating around the table, so not drawing is okay. And if You Find Some Prisoners, it also doubles as artifact removal in case we need to destroy a critical artifact. So that's nice to have that kind of utility on a 2-mana instant, which is wonderful. Last but not least, kind of doubling back the Ghostly Pilferer, it's a fairly strong card in a lot of different types of decks. The untapping and you can pay 2 to draw a card is okay, not the best. The ability to actually discard a card so that it can't be blocked is actually kind of nice, because being able to discard a card at instant speed with like Arcane Bombardment and some of the other cards we have in this deck that care about having instants and sorceries in our own graveyard, actually kind of very potent. However, it's this second ability in the middle there that is the reason why we included it in this deck, is that whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, draw a card. And there are a couple of different cards in this deck that allow opponents to basically exile the top card of their libraries and cast cards from the cards that have been exiled, Share the Spoils being a very obvious one. As such, it helps to have this synergy in there, so that means that while they're casting spells from places other than their hand, we can draw cards, and even if you assume we have no cards on our deck that could do that, Impulse Draw has become an incredibly popular way to gain card advantage in Commander, and as such, even without our deck doing anything, there's going to probably be a bunch of cards being casted from exile, with stuff like with cards like Light Up the Stage and so on and so forth being utilized. Moving on, we added even more cards. We added 1 or 2 artifacts like Mirror Shield here. This has the dual benefit of being that it buffs our commander's toughness, so we actually can tap Val down for more mana, and it also gives Val hexproof, and that's nice because Val's a very wonderful card to have out. It might become the source of some targeted spot removal, and this artifact helps Val to stay alive because it gives Val hexproof, which is wonderful. It also gives the benefit of that if Val has to block a creature with Death Touch, that creature's destroyed and Val can save the board from that. Moving on, obviously Val has an activated ability with a tap cost, so having various cards that help untap Val, very powerful. So I include Fate Stitcher here because of a couple different reasons. Fate Stitcher is a wizard, and we have a little bit of wizard synergy in this deck. Additionally, obviously, is that he can tap or untap Val or other target permanents, and he even has the Unearth ability. So in the event that he ends up in our graveyard, we can summon him back during a critical moment to untap Val or tap down something else and kind of keep ourselves alive. Disciple of the Ring, I'm not as confident about including this deck. I'm kind of running her as a test. I think she does have some powerful abilities. The Wizard synergy is wonderful, and the ability to exile an instant or sorcery card from our graveyard for 1 mana to get all these different modalities is very powerful. Obviously, we can untap Val, so we're basically paying 1 and exiling a card to untap Val and get a lot more mana. Or we can also counter target non-creature spells very easily, which is also effective. But I'm not confident how many instants or sorcery cards are going to routinely be in our graveyard with stuff like Arcane Bombardment and with us exiling a ton of our cards. So we're going to have to see if Disciple of the Ring stays in the final deck list for very long, but I think she could be a very synergistic piece overall. Looking at some of the last of the new inclusions, we have Stinging Lionfish and Tempt with Mayhem. Stinging Lionfish is going to be very interesting. I don't usually run decks with a ton of instants and sorceries, but this deck by itself has roughly in the neighborhood of almost 30 instants and sorceries by itself. And you also have to remember we're exiling our opponent's instants and sorceries, so there's a very good chance that we're going to be casting spells on our opponent's turn. And so the ability to untap Val in particular is super powerful, or we can tap down a big attacking creature to prevent it from attacking from our opponent's side of the field. And lastly, on the subject of instants and sorceries, we have Tempt with Mayhem. There are probably better options in the 3 mana cost than this particular instant, but it's such a fun pet card, and it's the core of what this deck is trying to do. Basically what it is we choose an instant or sorcery card, and we allow every single one of our opponents the option to copy that spell and choose new targets for the copy that they control. However, we get to automatically copy that spell for once, so we get 1 guarantee copying spell copy with this card for 3 mana. However, we also get to copy it an additional time for every opponent who chooses to copy it. And this is just a fun way where we could say choose a ramp spell. Every opponent could potentially choose it and ramp once, which is fantastic. But then we get to ramp 4 times, assuming we're at a pod of with 3 other opponents. So there's a fantastic way where this can turn into an insanely funny situation where there's just a ton of different spells flying around the table. And I think it fosters this spirit of camaraderie and silly chaoticness that this deck is aiming to achieve. So it has to go into the list for now. Lastly, we have the deck stats update. As you can see, our mana curve actually became even more refined. I think this is a much better mana curve than what we had originally. We've got more in the 2 cost and 3 cost, and we took out a couple of our higher costed cards that I think were kind of weak to begin with. And the deck price actually came down a little bit. It's probably sitting right around $35, $36, and that's pretty reasonable, I would say, compared to where it was at almost $40 previously. So this is wonderful, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this deck actually performs, and I thank you very much again at Yu-Gi-Oh! Nerd22. Very helpful with the Val selection, and I think it's going to be a much stronger commander, not to mention a much more underwhelming commander that people won't see coming. And that's actually all I have for you guys today. Thank you very much for tuning into this Deck Tech update, and have a wonderful day. Take care.